There is a part of you that you have never introduced to anyone, not because you forgot about it, but because the moment you felt it rising, you pushed it back down. You smiled instead. You stayed quiet instead. You said, "I'm fine," instead. And that part of you, the one you keep locking away, has been growing in the dark ever since. Psychologist Carl Jung called it the shadow, and what he discovered about it will change the way you see yourself forever. Most people go their entire lives believing that becoming a better person means getting rid of the parts they don't like. The anger, the jealousy, the selfish thoughts, the dark fantasies, the parts that don't match the image they've built for the world. So they bury them. They bury them in politeness, in perfectionism, in staying busy, in being the person everyone needs them to be. And for a while it works. But Jung noticed something deeply unsettling about this pattern. He watched it in his patients. He watched it in himself. And what he saw was this. The more a person tried to suppress who they really were, the more unstable their life became. The more they controlled their surface, the more chaos erupted underneath. In their relationships, in their bodies, in the quiet moments at 3 a.m. when they couldn't sleep and didn't know why. Jung said the shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It gets stronger. Think about the last time someone cut you off in traffic and you felt that flash of pure rage. Or the moment a friend got something you wanted and you felt that ugly twist in your chest. Or the night you said something cruel to someone you love and genuinely didn't recognize yourself. That was your shadow, not a demon. Not proof that you're broken, just the part of you that never got permission to exist. Jung spent decades studying what happens to people who refuse to face that part of themselves, and the pattern was always the same. Whatever you refuse to own inside yourself, you will eventually meet in the world around you. The person who insists they never get angry attracts rage everywhere they go. The person who denies their own selfishness ends up surrounded by people who take everything. The person who buries their darkness spends their whole life afraid of it in others. Jung called this projection, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here's where it gets personal. Think of the person in your life who irritates you the most, the one whose specific behavior gets under your skin in a way you can't quite explain. Maybe it's someone who talks too much. Maybe it's someone who seems too confident, too loud, too needy, too cold. Jung would ask you one question about that person. What if the thing that bothers you most about them is the thing you've refused to see in yourself? Not because you're exactly like them, but because somewhere buried under years of trying to be acceptable, there is a version of you that wanted to be that loud, that confident, that free, and you shut it down so long ago you forgot it was ever there. That is the shadow at work. Jung didn't discover the shadow to terrify people. He discovered it because he believed something radical, something that went completely against everything his era believed about human nature. He believed that wholeness was more important than goodness. He wasn't interested in helping people become perfect. He was interested in helping people become real, because he had seen what happened to people who chased perfection their whole lives. They became brittle, disconnected, capable of sudden cruelty they couldn't explain, exhausted by the performance of being someone they weren't, and he had seen what happened to the rare few who turned and faced their shadow instead. They became something different entirely, not darker, not worse, but somehow more solid, more present, like they had finally stopped running from themselves and the energy that took freed up for actually living. There was a man Jung wrote about, a respected professional, calm, controlled, well-liked, a kind of person people described as having it all together. But in his dreams something else kept appearing, a figure dark, unpredictable, wild. It frightened him so much he avoided sleep. He filled his days with work and obligations. He kept himself so busy there was no room for stillness. And then one day, with no warning, his life collapsed. His marriage, his career, his carefully constructed sense of who he was. Jung said this wasn't bad luck. It was the shadow demanding to be seen. Because the psyche has a drive toward wholeness that is stronger than our drive toward comfort. And when we refuse to listen to it gently, it finds a way to be heard anyway. So the question isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. Every single person alive does. The question is whether you're going to spend the rest of your life running from it, or whether you're going to do the thing that almost nobody has the courage to do. Turn around and face it. Jung discovered that the shadow isn't just made of darkness. This is the part that most people miss completely. Yes, your shadow holds the anger you were told was unacceptable, the desire you were taught to be ashamed of, the ambition you buried because someone made you feel like wanting more was wrong. But it also holds something else. It holds the parts of you that were simply too big for the rooms you grew up in, the creativity that got called weird, the sensitivity that got called weak, the voice that got called too much, the dreams that got called unrealistic. Those didn't disappear either. They went underground, into the shadow, waiting. Jung called this the golden shadow, and he believed it was just as important to reclaim as the dark parts, because a person who has cut themselves off from their own depth, their own wildness, their own hunger for something real, that person is only half alive. And somewhere inside you, you already know that. You feel it in the moments when you watch someone else living boldly, and feel something that isn't quite jealousy but isn't quite admiration either. You feel it when you're doing everything right and still feel vaguely empty. You feel it when someone asks what you really want, and you go completely blank because you've been been so focused on what's expected that you lost track of what's true. That emptiness isn't a flaw. That's your shadow knocking. So what does it actually look like to face it? Jung didn't make it complicated. He said start by paying attention to what provokes you, what irritates you, what you judge in others without fully understanding why. Because those reactions are a map. They're pointing directly at the parts of yourself you haven't met yet. He said pay attention to your dreams, not to decode them like a puzzle, but to sit with them. Because the unconscious speaks in images and feelings, and the shadow often shows up there first before it shows up in your waking life. He said get honest about the stories you tell yourself, the ones about why you can't, why you shouldn't, why you're not that kind of person. Because a lot of those stories were written to keep the shadow locked away, and they're costing you more than you realize. But here is the most important thing Jung ever said about the shadow, and I want you to actually hear this. He said you don't have to become your shadow to integrate it. Facing your anger doesn't mean becoming a cruel person. Acknowledging your jealousy doesn't mean acting on it. Recognizing your darkness doesn't mean surrendering to it. It means something far simpler and far more powerful. It means stopping the war. Because the energy you use to fight yourself every single day causes to suppress, deny, perform, pretend, that energy doesn't just evaporate when you reclaim it. It becomes available for your actual life. People who have done this work carry something different about them. You've met them before, even if you didn't have the words for it. They're the ones who don't need to prove anything, who can sit in a hard conversation without flinching, who can hear criticism without collapsing or raging, who can want something without apologizing for it, who can say no without a 3-paragraph explanation. They're not perfect. They're just not at war with themselves anymore. And that changes everything. The way they love, the way they work, the way they move through a room, the way they handle loss, the way they handle success, the way they show up for other people without losing themselves in the process. Jung called this individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who the world needed you to be. And he believed it was the most important work a human being could ever do. Here is what I want to leave you with. The shadow isn't your enemy. It never was. It's the part of you that refused to disappear no matter how many times life told it to. It's the part that survived every version of you that tried to be smaller, safer, more acceptable. It's been waiting, not to destroy you, to complete you. Jung spent his entire career watching people transform the moment they stopped running from themselves, not into perfect people, into real ones, into people who finally had access to the full range of who they were. That is available to you. Not someday, not after you fix everything else first. Right now, in the exact life you're living, with the exact history you carry, the shadow isn't asking you to become someone different. It's asking you to finally meet the person you already are. And that meeting, as terrifying as it sounds, might be the most important thing you ever do. If something in this felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not a coincidence, that's recognition.